He said it at the dinner table, loud enough for everyone to hear. He looked at his friend across from him, laughed, and said my name like it was a punchline. He said, "William is basically just our wallet. He does not say no to anything." My daughter laughed too, not a small, nervous laugh, a real one, the kind that tells you the joke was not new. I was standing in the kitchen doorway holding a bottle of wine I had brought for them. I had driven 40 minutes that evening because my daughter said she missed me. I had stopped at their favorite restaurant on the way and picked up dessert because I remembered her saying she had a craving. I was holding that bag in one hand and the wine in the other when I heard him say it. I did not drop anything. I did not say a word. I just stood there for a moment and then I walked back into the dining room and set the bottle down on the table like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something inside me clicked off like a light switch. And what came after that silence was not anger, it was clarity. I want you to understand something before this story goes any further. I am not a dramatic man, I do not make scenes, I do not fight at holidays. I built my business quietly, raised my daughter alone after my wife passed, and gave everything I had to people who called themselves my family. I trusted too long. I excused too much. I believed that love meant showing up even when nobody noticed. I was wrong. And the price of being wrong for that long is very high. This is the story of what I found when I finally started paying attention, and what I did with what I found. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something real. Not about clicking a button, about you. Have you ever done something kind for someone and found out later they were laughing at you the whole time? Have you ever loved someone so much that you made excuses for them until the excuses stopped making sense? If that hits close, stay with me, because what William did next was not loud, it was not mean, but it was final. And I want you to decide, somewhere around the middle of this story, whether you would have had the courage to do the same thing. Drop a comment before you finish. Tell me what moment would have broken you. My name is William. I am 63 years old. I own a mid-sized construction and property management company that I built from the ground up over 31 years. I started with 2 employees and a truck I could barely afford. At the time my daughter brought Derek home for the first time, my company had over 80 employees and managed 14 commercial properties across 3 counties. I tell you that not to brag. I tell you that so you understand what was at stake. And so you understand what kind of man Derek saw when he looked at me. My daughter's name is Claire. She is 34. She is smart, driven, and has her mother's eyes. Her mother, my wife Susan, passed away from cancer when Claire was 19. Those years after Susan died were the hardest of my life. Claire and I leaned on each other in ways most fathers and daughters never have to. We built something between us that felt unbreakable. I thought it was unbreakable. That turned out to be the most expensive assumption I ever made. Claire met Derek when she was 28. He was 31. Charming in that smooth, effortless way that makes everyone around him feel interesting. He asked great questions. He remembered small details you mentioned in passing. He looked you in the eye when he talked to you. I liked him immediately, and I am not usually quick to like people. I am a careful man by nature. But Derek had a warmth about him that lowered your guard before you even noticed your guard was up. He was working in commercial real estate sales when they met. Not a bad career, not exceptional either, but he was sharp and ambitious, and Claire seemed genuinely happy for the first time since her mother died. I wanted that for her more than I had wanted almost anything, so I welcomed Derek. I encouraged the relationship. When he and Claire got engaged 2 years later, I was the one who suggested we celebrate with a trip to Italy. I paid for all of it. I did it happily. The wedding was beautiful. I paid for that too, not because they could not contribute. By that point, Derek had moved into property investment, partly using connections I had made available to him, and Claire had a good salary from her marketing job, but I wanted the day to be perfect for her. Susan would have wanted it perfect, so I handled the venue, the catering, the flowers, the honeymoon. I wrote checks and I smiled, and I meant every penny of it. The first year of their marriage felt good. They were in a rented apartment, and I quietly helped with the rent during a rough quarter when Derek's commission structure changed. He thanked me. He seemed grateful. He brought it up at dinner once, told a friend of theirs that William came through for us when we needed it. I remember feeling proud that I could do that, proud that I was useful to my daughter's life. And that word, useful, became a trap I did not see I was walking into. Apartment became a house. They wanted to buy in a nice neighborhood on the north side of the city, strong schools, good resale value, close to a park. Derek had done his homework on the property and presented it to me one Sunday like a business case. He showed me the comps, the appreciation curve in that zip code, the long-term upside. He was persuasive. I lent them the down payment, a significant amount, under a written agreement that they would repay it over 5 years. Derek signed the paper. We shook hands. I want you to remember that paper. It comes back later. In the second and third years of their marriage, I noticed patterns I did not name at the time. I am naming them now. Derek started calling me more often, but the calls were almost always about something he needed: advice on a deal, an introduction to someone in my network, a question about how I had structured a particular property acquisition. I am not someone who keeps score, so at first I just thought he was eager. He was learning, that was fine. But Claire called less. The dinners we had always shared, first Sundays every month since Susan died, began to slip. One week it was Derek's work event. One week it was a trip with friends. One week it was just a quiet night at home. Sorry, Dad, we will reschedule. I rescheduled. Every time I brought the food or the wine or the dessert and I sat at their table and I was grateful to be included. I told myself this was normal. Married couples get busy. They build their own routines. What I did not see yet was that I was not being included. I was being summoned when something was needed and kept at a distance when nothing was. The business favor requests grew. Derek wanted me to co-sign on a commercial investment he was pursuing. A warehouse conversion project that he said had enormous upside. I looked at the numbers. They were not terrible, but the risk was real and the timeline was aggressive. I told him I wanted to sleep on it. He pushed back harder than felt comfortable. When I said I needed another week, he got quiet in a way that felt different from patience. It felt like frustration that I was not simply saying yes. I eventually declined the cosign. I told him it was not the right fit for me at that time. I offered instead to connect him with a private lending contact who might be a better match for the project. He said that was fine. But after that conversation, there were 3 weeks where I did not hear from either him or Claire, not a text, not a call. When Claire finally reached out, she was warm again, nothing was mentioned, and I told myself I had imagined the coldness. I had not imagined it. Around year 4 of their marriage, something shifted that I can only describe as a quiet turning away. Not a blow-up, not a confrontation, just a slow pulling back of warmth that I kept explaining away. I started to feel like a figure in their life rather than a person in it. I was invited to things that needed a check written. Birthdays, renovations, vacations, a boat Derek wanted to co-purchase with a colleague. But I was not called when Claire had a hard week at work. I was not included in the casual things that mean you actually belong somewhere. I noticed, but I did not act on what I noticed. That is the thing about being a patient man. Patience is a virtue until it becomes a permission slip for other people's bad behavior. And then came the dinner, the night I described at the beginning of this story. The night Derek said my name like a punchline, the wallet comment, my daughter laughed, his friend laughed, and something in me went very, very quiet. I stayed for the rest of that dinner. I poured the wine I had brought. I ate the food. I talked about nothing in particular. I drove home, walked into my house, sat in my chair in the living room, and I did not move for a long time. I was not crying. I was not angry in the loud way people expect anger to look. I was doing something I rarely do slowly. I was looking back. I was counting. I began with the down payment on their house, then the wedding, then the Italy trip, then the years of Sunday dinners I had brought food to, then the rent assistance, then the introductions and connections I had handed Derek on a plate, then the smaller things, the birthday trips, the holiday gifts, the times Claire mentioned the car needed work and somehow I ended up handling it, the times Derek had a cash flow gap and I filled it without a second thought, the home renovation they did 2 years ago. The new kitchen I had admired and quietly funded when Derek mentioned they were a little short. The number I arrived at was not a small one. It was a number that should have come with a contract and a payment plan and a signed agreement beyond one down payment. Note, but it did not, because I had given it the way you give things to family, without keeping receipts, without expecting it back, without understanding that one person in that family did not see it as love, he saw it as a resource. He saw me as a tool with a checkbook. I slept badly that night, not from grief, from the specific discomfort of a man who has finally stopped lying to himself. The next morning I called my attorney, a man named Paul who had handled my business affairs for over 20 years. I told him I wanted to review every financial transaction I had made connected to my son-in-law and my daughter over the past 6 years. I wanted it organized. I wanted it documented. Paul did not ask unnecessary questions. He said he would have something for me by the end of the week. While I waited, I started paying closer attention, not snooping, observing. I had been invited to a family barbecue at their house that coming weekend, one of Derek's colleague gatherings that I had attended before. I went. I arrived early enough to help set up. And I watched Derek work a room the way I had always admired, but now I was watching with different eyes. I watched how he introduced me to people. He called me Claire's dad, just Claire's dad, not William, not by my name, not with any context about who I was. To his friends and colleagues, I was background. I was furniture with a credit card. I watched how he steered conversations about the property investments he was making, taking credit for positioning and vision that had come directly from the network I had handed him. He did not mention me once. Claire was warm that day, genuinely warm, laughing and touching my arm and telling a story about something funny I had said years ago. And for a moment I felt the old pull. The voice that says, maybe it is fine, maybe you are overreacting, she loves you, that is enough. But then Derek walked over, put his arm around Claire, looked at me and said, William, when you have a minute, I wanted to pick your brain about something. And the way he said it told me everything. He was not walking over because he saw his father-in-law. He was walking over because he spotted an opportunity. I smiled and said, of course, but I had already decided something. When Paul sent me the full financial summary, I drove to his office to review it in person. What I saw laid out on that conference table was not what I expected. I expected to feel sad. Instead, I felt a strange, steady calm. The total between the down payment loan, the documented gifts, the informal cash transfers that Paul had reconstructed from my bank records, and the business introductions that had directly led to Derek's two biggest commission deals was staggering. Paul had also pulled the original down payment loan document. It had been 6 years. Not a single repayment had been made, not one. Paul looked at me over his glasses and said, "William, do you want to know your options?" And I said yes, and we talked for 2 hours. The loan was enforceable. The document Derek had signed was legally sound. Paul confirmed we could move to formal collection if I chose. That was option 1. Option 2 was more nuanced and had to do with a business decision I had been considering for unrelated reasons, one that now became very related. Option 3 involved my estate planning, which I had not updated since before Claire's wedding. I chose all 3. But I did not move on any of them immediately. That is the thing people do not understand about quiet revenge. It does not happen in the heat of the moment. It is not driven by rage. It is planned. It is patient. It is applied at the right time to create the maximum and most honest consequence. I had learned patience in 30 years of business. I was about to use it in my personal life for the first time. 2 weeks after my meeting with Paul, Derek called me. He had an opportunity he wanted to talk about, a large mixed-use development project. He needed capital partners and he had pitched it to his usual contacts, but the lead investor had pulled out and the deal was in danger of collapsing. He said he believed in the project and did not want to see it fall apart. He said, "You have always had a great eye for these things, William. I think this would be right for you." I listened to everything he said. I asked 3 or 4 questions that sounded like genuine interest. I told him to send me the full prospectus and I would review it. He sounded relieved. He said, "I really appreciate this. You always come through." I read the prospectus. The project was real and had merit. Under different circumstances, I might have genuinely considered it. But these were not different circumstances. These were the exact circumstances I had spent my whole life building toward being free of. I wrote Derek a brief email. I told him I had reviewed the materials carefully and I was not in a position to invest at this time. I thanked him for thinking of me. I wished him well on the project. He called within an hour. His voice was different. The smooth warmth was still there on the surface, but underneath it was something tight. He said he was surprised. He said he thought this was exactly the kind of deal I usually went for. I said I understood his disappointment. I said my capital was committed in other directions right now. He pushed. I did not move. He said something then that I want to write down very carefully because I want you to hear how a man sounds when he realizes the wallet has a mind of its own. He said, "William, I want to be honest with you. Claire and I have been counting on you being involved in this one. We have kind of built our plans around you stepping in here." I let that sentence sit for a moment. Then I said, "I hear you, Derek, but I cannot make an investment based on what someone else has built their plans around. I hope the project finds the right partner," and I ended the call. That was the first wall. He had never hit a wall with me before. I could feel the shock of it through the phone even before I hung up. 3 days later, Claire called, not to ask about the investment directly. She said she just wanted to check in. We talked about small things for a few minutes. Then she said, "Derek mentioned you passed on his project." She sounded careful. I said, "Yes, the timing was not right for me." She said, "Oh, okay." She paused. Then she said, "He was really hoping you would come in on this one, Dad. He has worked really hard on it." I told her I knew he had and I was proud of the work he was doing. I told her my decision was simply a financial one and had nothing to do with my belief in Derek's abilities. She seemed to accept that. But I could hear something underneath her words, a mild tension, a slight confusion, as if I had broken a pattern she had come to rely on without noticing it was a pattern. I had broken it on purpose, but we were only at the beginning. Over the next 2 months, I made a series of quiet moves. I updated my estate plan with Paul. This was something I should have done years ago and had been lazy about. I restructured the trust that held my business and my properties. I made provisions that were thoughtful, fair to Claire as my daughter and my only heir, but structured in a way that any interest passing to a spouse was tied to conditions Paul and I crafted carefully. This was not punishing Claire. This was protecting what I had built from being treated as a piggy bank by someone who had made his feelings about me very clear at a dinner table. I also, through Paul, sent a formal letter to Derek's home address. The letter was polite, professional, and unambiguous. It referenced the original down payment loan agreement. It noted that 6 years had passed with 0 repayments. It stated that I was formally requesting the loan be restructured under a new repayment schedule attached and that the first payment would be expected within 30 days. I did not call ahead. I did not warn him it was coming. I just sent the letter. I heard nothing for 11 days. Then Derek called me on a Tuesday morning and his voice was not smooth at all anymore. He was trying to sound calm, but I could hear the edge under every word. He said he had received the letter and was a little caught off guard by it. He said he thought that was more of an informal arrangement. I said the document he signed did not use the word informal. He said he had to talk to Claire about this. I said that was completely reasonable, and I looked forward to hearing from them. Claire called me that evening. I could tell she had been crying. She said she did not know about the letter. She said Derek had told her about it and she was confused because she thought it was a gift. I told her calmly and clearly that the down payment had always been a loan, that Derek had signed a document to that effect, and that I had a copy she was welcome to review. She went quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Dad, why are you doing this now?" That question deserved a real answer. I thought carefully before I gave it. I said, "Claire, I love you. That has not changed and will not change. But I have been part of your life in a way that was not honest. I was being used in a way I chose not to see for too long. I am not angry. I am not trying to hurt anyone. I am just making sure that the things I worked 30 years to build are treated with the same respect I have always tried to give to you." She cried. I let her. I did not take it back. What I did not know yet was what was happening on Derek's end simultaneously. I found out later, piecing together information from multiple sources, that Derek had used the expectation of my investment in his development project as part of his pitch to other potential partners. He had implied without saying it directly that a well-known local property developer was coming in as a capital partner. He had used my name and my reputation as a lure. When I declined, that lure disappeared, and some of his potential partners noticed. I did not know this the week I sent the loan letter, but I found out about it shortly after from a colleague of mine who sat on the board of a local commercial real estate organization. He mentioned in passing that Derek Calloway had been circulating a pitch deck that referenced my involvement. My colleague had asked Derek about it at a networking event. Derek had been vague, and the conversation had ended awkwardly. I sat with that information for a full 24 hours before I decided what to do with it. What I did was nothing dramatic. I simply sent Derek a short, factual email. I told him I had become aware that my name may have been mentioned in connection with his development project. I stated clearly that I had no involvement in the project and had declined to invest. I said I was not making any accusations about intent, but I wanted to be straightforward that my name and reputation were not available for use in any capacity without my explicit written consent. I sent a copy to Paul. Derek's response came 6 hours later. It was 3 paragraphs of explanation and damage control. He said it was a misunderstanding. He said he had only mentioned my name as someone he had consulted for advice, not as an investor. He apologized for any confusion it caused. I replied with one line. I said, "Thank you for clarifying. I have noted this for my records." That reply told him everything he needed to understand about where we stood now. He was being documented. The man who had laughed at the wallet had just discovered the wallet kept receipts. A week later, I had lunch with a man named Gerald, an old friend who was also Claire's uncle, Susan's brother. Gerald and I had stayed close after Susan died. He was a good man, straightforward and honest, and he had always had a complicated relationship with Derek. Not hostile, just observant. Gerald had noticed things over the years and mentioned them carefully without pushing. At that lunch, Gerald said something that added a new layer to everything I had been processing. He said, "William, did Claire ever tell you about the conversation she had with Derek before the wedding?" I said no. Gerald looked at his coffee for a moment, then he told me. Before the wedding, Derek and Claire had an argument. Gerald had been at their apartment helping move some furniture when he overheard part of it. Derek had said something to Claire about her father's money, about building a future that did not depend on someone else's success, and then he had said, "But we should not be stupid about the resources that are available to us while we have them." Gerald said he had replayed that phrase many times over the years. We should not be stupid about the resources that are available to us while we have them. He was talking about me before the wedding, before the Italy trip, before the house, before any of it. I was a resource, a planned resource. And my daughter had heard that, and she had still gotten on the plane to Italy and walked down the aisle and laughed at the wallet joke 6 years later. I did not say much for the rest of that lunch. Gerald knew he had handed me something heavy. He said, "I am sorry I did not tell you sooner. I was not sure it was my place." I told him I understood. I meant it. But what I was holding now was something different from a financial injury. It was a picture of my daughter making a choice to let it happen, not an accident, a choice. She had heard her fiancé describe her father as a resource, and she had proceeded with the plan, and I had to sit with what that meant without it destroying my love for her, because I still loved her. I just could no longer pretend I did not know what I knew. I went home and I sat with a photograph of Susan for a long time. I do not know exactly what I was asking her, something about whether there was a way to love your child and also protect yourself from the way they had learned to see you. I did not get a clear answer from the photograph, but I felt calmer afterward. I made 2 more decisions that week. The first was to formally step back from any informal financial involvement with Derek and Claire's life. Not cruelly, not suddenly, but clearly. I told Claire in a phone call that going forward I would no longer be able to offer the kind of financial support I had in the past. I told her my business was at a stage where I needed to be more intentional with capital. I told her this was not personal and I loved her. She did not respond well. She got quiet and then she said she needed to think. I said, take all the time you need. The second decision was about my business. Derek had been using one of my company's commercial properties as office space for his real estate operation. It had started 2 years earlier as a short-term favor, a below-market lease while he was getting his operation off the ground. The lease had ed over twice on informal terms. It was not a dramatic amount, but it was real, and the below-market rate had been costing me money I had been willing to absorb as a family gesture. I instructed my property manager to send Derek's company a formal lease renewal notice. The new terms were at full market rate. The notice gave him 60 days to sign the new lease or vacate. When Derek received that notice, the call that came was not Tuesday voice. It was not the email apology voice either. It was a different register entirely. He called my cell phone and said, William, I need to understand what is happening here. And I told him simply that I was managing my properties at current market rates as part of a business review. He said that felt like a personal attack. I told him I was sorry he felt that way, but I could not operate commercial property at a loss indefinitely. He said I thought we were family, and I paused before I answered that. I paused because that sentence deserved a real pause. Then I said, Derek, family was exactly what I was thinking about when I gave you that space at a discount for 2 years. I hope the new terms work for your business. If they do not, I understand and I wish you the best. He hung up. Claire called 40 minutes later. She was not crying this time. She was something between hurt and angry, a tone I had not heard from her before. She said, Dad, you are being cruel. I said, Claire, I am running my business. She said, you are going after Derek because he hurt your feelings. I said, your husband told his friends I was a wallet at a dinner table that I drove 40 minutes to and brought food to out of love. I heard him say it. I am not going after anyone. I am stopping something I should have stopped years ago. There was a long silence. Then she said, I did not know he said that. I said, I believe you, and I meant it. I believed her, but I also knew it did not change very much. Because even if she did not know he said that specific thing, she knew what kind of man he was. She had heard him in their apartment before the wedding. She had watched 6 years happen and said nothing. Knowing something and acting on it are two different things. I told her I loved her. She did not say it back before she ended the call. That hurt more than any of the rest of it. 3 weeks passed. It was a strange kind of quiet, no calls from Derek, fewer from Claire. I went to work. I had dinner with Gerald once. I went to church on Sundays, which I had been doing less of since Susan died and had recently started again. I read in the evenings. I noticed that the absence of their constant presence in my life, which I had expected to feel like loss, felt more like relief. That told me something important about how much pressure I had been living under without admitting it. Then the development project fell apart. I found out from my colleague on the commercial real estate board. The lead investor Derek had brought in after my rejection had done his own due diligence and found some inconsistencies in the projections Derek's team had prepared. Nothing illegal but optimistic in a way that lost credibility under scrutiny. The investor walked. With him went 2 smaller partners who had been waiting to see how the lead moved. The project was effectively dead. Derek had leveraged a significant amount of his own money into the early stages of that project. Pre-development costs, architectural fees, consultants. That money was now exposed with no project to attach it to. From what my colleague understood, it was not a catastrophic loss, but it was a serious one. I did not feel satisfaction in the way people might expect. I felt something quieter than that. I felt the truth being confirmed. Derek was a man who had been building his financial life on a foundation that was partly mine, and when that foundation quietly shifted, his structure had nothing solid underneath it. But Derek was not done. He was a man who had never been told no for long. He was a man who found ways through. And the next thing he did surprised me, not because it was clever, but because it was desperate. He came to my office. He did not make an appointment. He drove to my building on a Wednesday morning and told my assistant he was my son-in-law and needed 5 minutes. My assistant, who had worked for me for 11 years, looked at him for a moment and then called me on the intercom. I said, send him in. Derek walked into my office and I saw immediately that he had not slept well. He still looked put together. The clothes were right. The posture was controlled. But around his eyes was the particular tightness of a man who had been running numbers in his head at 3 in the morning. He sat across from my desk and looked at me and said, William, I need to be honest with you. I said, please. He said, I know I have not always shown you the respect you deserve. He said he had been under enormous pressure building his career and had let that pressure make him careless about the relationships that mattered. He said he was sorry for the things I had heard. He said he was sorry for not keeping up with the loan payments and that he had always intended to repay it. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. I did not show anything on my face. When he finished, I asked him one question. I said, "Derek, why are you here today?" He blinked. Then he said he was hoping we could come to a new understanding about the lease. He said if I could give him another year at the current rate, it would give him time to stabilize the situation with the project and restructure. I nodded slowly. I said, "I appreciate you coming in and saying those things." It took something, then I said, "But I have to be straightforward with you. This is not a situation I am going to reverse. The lease will be at market rate or I will need the space back. The loan repayment schedule stands, and my involvement in your deals, formal or informal, is done." He looked at me for a moment that stretched longer than felt comfortable. Then he said, "Claire is not going to understand this." I said, "Claire is a grown woman. What she understands is between you two." He said, "You are punishing her for something I did." I said, "I am protecting myself. That is not the same thing." He left without shaking my hand. I sat at my desk for a long time after he left. I pulled up a photo on my phone. It was an old one from about 10 years ago before Claire met Derek. It was taken at a small restaurant we used to go to on Susan's birthday every year, a tradition we had started together after she died. In the photo, Claire is laughing at something I said. Her head is back and her eyes are closed and she looks completely free. I used to be able to make her laugh like that without effort. I wondered when that had become the past tense. The lease on the office space expired and Derek did not sign the new terms. His company vacated the space at the end of the 60 days. I had a new tenant in within 3 weeks at full market rate. The loan repayment schedule I had sent through Paul was met with one partial payment in the first month, about a third of what was due, and then silence. I had Paul send a follow-up notice. Derek's personal attorney responded with a letter requesting a reduction in the balance based on what he called the history of the gifting relationship. Paul responded with the signed loan document and a list of the specific dates and amounts that were demonstrably loans, not gifts, including Derek's own words in a text message 2 years earlier where he had said he would pay me back once the project cleared. That text message was something I had found while looking through my phone during those first quiet evenings after the dinner. I had screenshotted it and sent it to Paul the same night. I want you to understand that keeping that message was not calculating. I had not saved it as a weapon. I had saved it because at the time he sent it I had felt relieved, and I had read it again later and felt reassured. I had saved it the way you save something that made you feel seen. The irony of it being used as evidence was not lost on me. 2 months after Derek vacated the office space, Claire called me on a Sunday, not the first Sunday of the month, just a Sunday, and she asked if she could come over. I said yes. She sat in my living room in the chair Susan used to like, and she looked at me for a long time before she said anything. Then she said, "Dad, I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me." I said, "Of course." She said, "Did you love us? Or were you always just trying to control us with money?" That question hit me somewhere deep. Not because it was fair, but because I understood how a person arrives at that question when the financial scaffolding of their life suddenly changes and someone is recalibrating around them. I said, "Claire, every dollar I ever spent on you and Derek came from love, not control. I do not need control. I built my business because I love the work. I gave to you because I love you. What I did not know how to do was stop giving when the giving was not being received the way it was offered. Your husband told his friends I was a wallet. I was listening. And when I finally started listening to what was being said about me instead of what I wanted to believe, I had to respond to the truth instead of the story I had been telling myself." She was quiet, then she said, "He told me what happened, with the project, with the name, with the impression he gave people about your involvement." I said I knew she had heard. She said, "I did not know he was doing that." I said, "I believe you." She said, "He is not a bad person, Dad. He just gets desperate when he feels cornered." I said, "I know, but desperation is not an excuse for using people." She looked at the floor. Then she said, "I am sorry I laughed that night at dinner. I did not really think about how it sounded." I said, "I know, but it sounded a certain way, and it helped me see clearly." She cried then, and I went and sat next to her and I did not take any of it back, but I put my arm around her and I stayed there, because she was still my daughter. She was still the girl in that photograph. And the difference between protecting yourself and destroying a relationship is knowing which lines you are drawing and why. What I told her that afternoon in my living room was that I was not going anywhere. I was not removing myself from her life. I was removing myself from a role that was not being honored. I was no longer going to be a resource, but I was absolutely going to be her father. Those are different things, and she needed to understand the difference. She said she needed time. I said, "Take it." Derek's situation deteriorated further over the following months. The failed development project had created a credibility problem in his professional circles. Word moves fast in commercial real estate, and the story of a pitch deck built on implied partnerships that did not exist found legs. He lost two clients who had been with him for a couple of years. He picked up smaller work, but the trajectory of his career had bent. The loan, Paul eventually moved toward formal legal steps to collect. Derek's attorney came back with a settlement offer, roughly 60% of the balance paid over 18 months. Paul and I discussed it. I accepted. It was not everything, but it was real money coming back, and it avoided a court proceeding that would have been unpleasant for everyone, including Claire. The first payment under the settlement arrived on time. I put it in an account I had recently set up. I had a plan for what to do with that money, and it had nothing to do with Derek or his projects. I want to tell you about that plan, because this is the part of the story that is mine. Around the time all of this was happening, I had quietly been in conversations with a nonprofit organization in my city that built affordable housing units and did renovation work in underserved neighborhoods. It was work I had always respected from a distance, but never made time for. They needed a capital partner for a project they had been trying to get off the ground for 3 years. The project would build 22 units of affordable senior housing on a plot of land they had already secured. I became that capital partner. I did not make an announcement. I did not host a gala. I simply wrote the agreement, signed the papers, and started working with their team. The same skills and the same network I had used to build my commercial portfolio, I began directing towards something I had wanted to do for a long time but had somehow been too busy, too distracted, too focused on maintaining everyone else's comfort to pursue. The groundbreaking for the senior housing project happened on a Thursday morning in early spring. I stood on a piece of dirt that was about to become 22 homes for people who had worked their whole lives and needed somewhere safe and affordable to be. I was 63 years old. I was standing alone, no family beside me, no ceremony, just a man and a project and a clear morning. And I was genuinely happy, quieter than I expected, more solid than I had felt in years. Claire came to the soft opening of the first building 8 months later. She came alone. She and Derek were going through what she described to me as a very difficult period. I did not ask for details. I told her I was there if she needed to talk, and I let her lead the pace. She walked through the building, asked thoughtful questions about the project, and at one point stood looking at a common room with big windows and said, "Mom would have loved this." I said I thought so too. We had dinner afterward at the restaurant we used to go to on Susan's birthday, first time in years. We did not talk about Derek much. We talked about Susan. We talked about the early years of Claire's life that I miss sometimes with a weight I could not fully describe. We talked about what she wanted for herself going forward. She said she was not sure. I said that was okay. Not knowing yet is not the same as being lost. By the time I am writing this, the loan settlement payments have been arriving on schedule. Derek and Claire are in couples counseling, which I did not suggest and would not have. That was their decision, and I think it was a brave one. I do not know what they will decide about their marriage. That is not mine to decide. What is mine is what I do with the life I have left. The company is doing well. The senior housing project is being referenced by 2 other nonprofits who want to replicate the model. Paul and I have done a full review of my estate plan, and it reflects exactly what I want it to reflect. Every decision in it was made with clarity, not anger. I have dinner with Gerald once a month. I go to church on Sundays. I read more than I used to. I sleep better. I did not scream at anyone. I did not embarrass anyone at a family event. I did not cut my daughter out of my life. I did not declare war on Derek or chase him through the courts for the full amount. I simply stopped being a wallet. I started being a man who kept his own receipts, honored his own values, and made his own decisions about where his resources, his money, his time, his reputation, and his love were going to go. That is what quiet looks like. That is what it feels like when a man stops performing generosity for people who were never going to honor it and starts being genuinely generous toward the world that actually deserves it. I still love my daughter. I told her so last Sunday when she called. She said she loved me too. She sounded like she meant it. We are building something different now. Slower, more honest, without the transactions underneath the tenderness. I do not know yet what it will look like fully, but it feels real. And after 6 years of something that looked beautiful and felt hollow, real is exactly what I needed. If you are reading this and you recognize yourself in this story, I want to say one thing directly. The moment when you finally start listening to what is actually being said about you instead of the story you have been telling yourself is not a defeat. It is not a failure of love. It is the beginning of something that actually has a chance of lasting. The wallet closed and William finally opened. If you made it all the way here, I want to say something to you before you leave. William did not win by being loud. He won by being still. He won by keeping one text message, by reading one loan document, by asking one attorney one question, by finally, after 6 years, listening to what was actually being said about him. If someone in your life has been quietly treating you like a resource, you already know it. You have been talking yourself out of knowing it. The question is not whether you see it. The question is what you do with what you see. Drop a comment below. Tell me which moment would have been your breaking point. And if this story found the part of you that needed to hear it, share it with someone who is still in the middle of their own silence. Because sometimes all a person needs is proof that the quiet move is the powerful one.